This is the artificial intelligence voice of Patrick Bet David narrating this pod slice summary of the PBD Podcast. Jeremy Boring, co-founder and co-CEO of the Daily Wire, and Patrick Bet David discuss various topics in their podcast conversation. Boring is widely known for his roles in political media, empowering diverse voices through his platforms, and for his entrepreneur ventures inside and outside of the media industry. Boring dives into the struggles of balancing faith and the pursuit of wealth, explaining that fame, wealth, and power can separate you from your humanity. He debates the concept of serving both God and money, suggesting that it's more productive to aim for success as opposed to being driven solely by wealth. His approach is to hold on to success lightly, acknowledging that circumstances can change at any moment, but our reactions and resilience make the difference. Boring prides himself on having an entrepreneurial mindset, emphasizing the willingness to face failure and learn from it. This philosophy has fueled his various business endeavors, from founding a razor company out of annoyance with existing razor brands, to initiating a chocolate company that caters to diverse consumer preferences. Boring then discusses the challenge of managing public disputes within the company, such as the recent one between colleagues Candace Owens and Ben Shapiro. As the CEO, he believes in giving people the autonomy to voice their beliefs, but this autonomy can occasionally lead to public conflict. In such situations, he mentions that one needs to rely on delicate interference without forcing people to back down. Talking about his dual role as a creative and an operator, Boring admits it can be challenging to switch between the right brain and left brain functionalities. He believes that being an entrepreneur shares many similarities with being a creative. Both roles involve creating something out of nothing. He finds it easier to transition from operations to creativity within a day rather than the other way around. He also notes the value of hiring great operators to delegate operational tasks to allowing him to focus on his creative inclinations. Throughout the conversation, Boring shares insights from his varied experiences, offering a peek into the mind of a multifaceted entrepreneur thriving in the intertwined worlds of media, politics, and the ongoing conversation between Jeremy Boring and Patrick Bet David. Boring continues to explore his entrepreneurial journey while providing unique insights. Boring highlights the critical role people play in the growth of any business, emphasizing the importance of hiring professionals who are great operators that can enhance the company's performance. And the effective delegation of tasks, he suggests, not only bolsters the business's overall potential, but also allows entrepreneurs like him to focus on creative endeavors. Boring then transitions into discussing his viewpoint on power and its effects, using as an example his experience in Hollywood, where people in influential positions often exhibit dominance over those seeking a break in the industry. Boring reveals a bias in the system, comparing conventional business structures to the unique dynamics existing within Hollywood's fiercely competitive environment. He suggests that this disparity in power dynamics often leads to corrosive behaviors, forcing individuals to conform to unwritten standards to gain approval. During the discourse, Boring speaks candidly about his moment of realization within the Hollywood system, where he realized he couldn't conform to the system's expectations. This event marked a turning point in his life, pushing him towards a path, deviating from the pressures of the entertainment industry and navigating towards being his authentic self. Responding to Bet David's question about who he considers his enemy, Boring refrains from naming one, but instead shares that he holds animosity towards forces or entities that coercively impose their worldview onto others. He perceives such imposition as an authoritarian approach, a growing sentiment in modern times, visible not just on the political left, but also surfacing on the right. This unfiltered dialogue between Boring and Bet David provides an enriching journey into the mind of Jeremy Boring, dissecting complex issues across business, politics, Hollywood dynamics, and individual authenticity. Jeremy Boring and Patrick Bet David delve deeper into the discussion of the Hollywood ecosystem, raising carnivorous questions about the struggles many conservative actors face off stage. People in the industry, according to Boring, often hide their true political affiliations due to prevalent stigma, a practice birthed from fear of career suicide. This is where organizations like Friends of Abe intervene, providing an underground network for politically conservative individuals in Hollywood, which Boring once led as an executive director. David channels the conversation towards Boring's viewpoint on the dichotomy of fear versus authenticity within Hollywood, especially within the group Friends of Abe. Boring shares his experiences of hosting new member meetings, emphasizing the real fear and anxiety many faced about their conservative political leanings being found out. These apprehensions, he noted, were so severe that some even contemplated the potential dissolution of their marriages if their beliefs were discovered. Referencing a trend in Hollywood, wherein many veterans opt to risk speaking out against bureaucratic biases, Boring clarifies that there are indeed larger names in the industry who silently detest the mainstream's imposed norms. Yet, he empathizes that the risk associated with going public is still considerable, especially for those earning significant income from the industry. Boring's vision involves creating an alternative platform for those frustrated with the current system, a space in which entertainers can work and express themselves freely. He underscores the importance of demonstrating to the Hollywood community that an alternative, flourishing career pathway exists outside the mainstream industry. This revelation, he believes, could potentially act as a catalyst for a significant exodus of talent seeking authenticity and creative freedom. As they shift the topic to religious institutions, Bet David prompts Boring to comment on a recent instance where Pope Francis hosted a lunch with transgender men. While Boring isn't Catholic, he emphasizes the importance of heritage and tradition, both integral to fostering a sense of community and nationhood. However, the actions of Pope Francis seem to be politically charged and diametrically opposed to his conservative viewpoint. Boring speculates that the Pope's actions could be interpreted either as a political statement or as an attempt to underline the theological idea of universal grace, highlighting the complexity and nuance inherent in such actions. In the podcast, the conversation continues with Patrick Bet David asking Boring how conservative views would be impacted if his organization, Daily Wire, hosted an event where transgender individuals bought tickets and attended. This question mirrored the earlier discussion about Pope Francis hosting an event for transgender individuals. Despite the controversial aspect, Boring reasons that he would not be opposed to them attending since tickets are available for purchase to the public. He believes in not hiding motives and appreciates forthrightness. David then segues into the phenomenon of transgender identifying youth skyrocketing in the last decade. He queries whether this rise is an organic occurrence or a result of a premeditated, engineered social revolution. Boring acknowledges this as a social contagion, a notion that exists due primarily to the internet, where the exposure of one idea can manifest in an entire group subscribing to it. He adds, the power of a single thought to destroy a life is far more powerful than a nuclear bomb. The power of media's influence to shape societal narratives and culture is also underscored. But David uses the example of the 1943 Titanic movie, a German propaganda film that was commissioned by the Nazi propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels, to conclude that the potent impact of media, both movies and music, cannot be underestimated. Events in history corroborating this premise include Ronald Reagan's opposition to Stalin's influence in Hollywood that led to his tenure as head of SAG and the crafting of multiple policies. Subsequently, Boring reiterates the significance of ideologies, seeking to change the individual, and how these have manipulated some of the most influential tools known to mankind. He emphasizes the danger posed by naivety in this regard. Checking out power lies in those who are aware of their weapons and their effectiveness, even as others choose to remain oblivious. Media remains a powerful tool for shaping society's views, beliefs, and ideologies, leading to swift and radical shifts in collective understanding and acceptance. The dialogue continues between Bet David and Boring, who argue the necessity for leaders to stand firm on their values and principles without necessarily compromising love and understanding. This commentary is led by the issue of compromise, with Bet David pointing out the importance of being uncompromising when it comes to one's values and principles. David shares a personal experience about interviewing Mike Ditka, expressing his disappointment with Ditka's regret for making tough comments about Colin Kaepernick earlier in his career. He tries to encourage Ditka not to apologize and mentions, we need more leaders who refuse to compromise their principles. Bet David also talks about his own experience of welcoming differences in his personal life, speaking about his Turkish Muslim chef and their amicable relationship despite historical and religious variances. He underlines his emphasis on love, respect, and mutual discussion. The discussion notably moves to the power and necessity of strong leadership against clear backdrops in the political world. They use examples of presidential approval ratings increasing when presidents take a firm stand against a clear backdrop, illustrating the importance of certainty and conviction in leadership. There's also a discussion about Pope Francis, who has taken more liberal stances in recent years, with Bet David expressing his disagreement with such postures. Boring then offers insights into his latest film, Ladyballers, a comedy about a group of men who dominate women's sports by simply claiming they identify as women. The film is an attempt to poke fun at the sensitive issue of transgender athletes in women's sports. Boring also delves into Hollywood's restrictive nature, arguing that more conservative or contentious films are unlikely to gain major theatrical releases. He posits that his film, despite its potential to outkick its coverage, would not be screened in theaters because of its controversial stance, reflecting the broader implications of ideological bias within entertainment industries. In this part of the conversation, Boring and Bette David discuss the recent criticisms against Disney for their more liberal content. Boring elaborates that Disney has been put on notice after their left-leaning content negatively impacted their shareholders, as detailed in a filing with the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission. Here, Disney recognizes the potential risk of misalignment with consumer taste and preferences and how these could adversely affect the demand for their products. After this recent public filing, Disney stock hit a 9-year low, with its market capital dropping from $350 billion in March of 2022 to $154 billion, marking a decline of $196 billion, or a 56% drop in value in a year. Later, the discussion pivots to Disney's 100th anniversary film Wish, which underperformed at the box office, earning about $31.07 million over its initial 5 days. However, despite the financial setback, Disney continues to produce content in line with its current direction. But a dialogue proceeds to examine the performance of Bob Iger, the prior CEO of Disney, with Bette David referring to Iger as one of the greatest deal makers in the last 4 decades. The hosts speculate whether the blame for Disney's downturn should land on Iger's shoulders, given his decision to return to Disney after initially. However, Boring points out that any change in Disney's content direction would take years due to the lengthy process of film production, indicating that any recent difficulties may be the result of decisions made years prior. They also discuss the potential resistance from Disney's internal talent, suggesting that many are not in alignment with the company's present course. Boring affirms that the company's current strategy has left many previous fans feeling they no longer belong. He also highlights the importance of shared values in creating a community around content, stating that Disney's shift away from traditional stories of good versus evil and more towards identity politics has alienated people. Finally, Boring points out that the objective of entertainment is to engage, not to propagate a value set, and when a company deviates from its primary commitment to entertain, it opens up for other content providers to claim the neglected audience. The conversation between Bette David and Boring continues to critique Disney's current state from a business perspective. Boring comments that even if Bob Iger, Disney's CEO, wished to reverse course and eliminate the politically charged content, he would not have the personnel to execute this change, describing Disney as a bubble within an industry, city, and state, all of which share similar ideologies. The talk delves into how Disney, once a cherished brand with immense influence over children's worldviews, has committed brand suicide, in Boring's words. This result, he argues, demonstrates the consequence for any business that perceives itself as more potent than its audience, emphasizing Disney's loss of its core audience due to its current content direction. Bette David explains the concept of zombie companies, businesses that only make enough money to cover operating expenses and debts without any profits for internal investments. Zombie companies rely heavily on debts for growth. He cites Ford, iHeartMedia, and other major corporations as examples of these, attributing their rise from 1 to 25 of American companies, according to the Fed, to multi-year low interest rates. David warns that if the Federal Reserve Chair, Jerome Powell, keeps interest rates high, many of today's zombie companies, including Disney, may need to be bought out by others. He gives the example of Apple potentially buying Disney to illustrate this, but he also emphasizes that Powell would also have the power to help zombie companies make a comeback if he were to lower interest rates again. The dialogue then transitions to discuss the film industry, specifically the movie Napoleon by Ridley Scott, which had a budget of $200 million and an underperformance of $79 million. They bring in this example to highlight a trend in Western film where leaders are portrayed weakly or insecurely. This misrepresentation, they argue, is similar to how Disney and other companies are misaligned with their audience's preferences and expectations. Following that, they comment on the ongoing situation in Dublin, Ireland, regarding the acceptance of refugees, where Conor McGregor is mentioned, but the specifics aren't shared at this point. City, the conversation evolves into a discussion on the current situation in Dublin, where civil unrest has erupted following a stabbing incident outside a school, leaving 3 children injured and a 5-year-old girl in critical condition. The Wall Street Journal suggests this violence is tied to far-right ideologies and disputes over immigration. Jeremy Boring underlines the complexities of immigration, emphasizing that appropriate assimilation is key to maintaining a country's unique culture and avoiding conflicts that may escalate to violence. The dialogue then shifts to Conor McGregor's criticism of the Irish government's handling of the matter. McGregor rejects the riots and damage to properties, but acknowledges the necessity for change in Ireland. He signals a possible entry into politics, promising a significant transformation in Ireland. The pair delve into the response of the Irish government to these incidents, their proposed hate speech bill, and the subsequent dissatisfaction among the Irish citizens. David Boring then explore the global rise of right-wing movements, citing the elections of Nicolas Maduro in Venezuela and Geert Wilders in the Netherlands as examples. They acknowledge the growing pushback against increasingly left-leaning governments around the world, with Bet David seeing hope in humanity's determination to hold onto their freedoms and rights. The discussion then turns toward Poland's strategy with its zero refugee intake policy. Poland's stance on its safety and national identity stands as a contrast to many other increasingly liberal democracies where a loss of national identity is noted. Poland and Hungary are pointed out as safe countries due to their immigration policies, and the pair ponders if these countries also showcase autocratic tendencies. The conversation turns towards broader societal changes, such as radical individualism that are leading to a loss of individual identity globally. They touch upon how the importance of national identity and culture, despite their flaws, has been undermined in the name of inclusivity. The dialogue concludes with a look at the recent political shifts in Argentina, reflecting a global trend of citizens demanding change. The podcast continues on elaborating the economic crisis in Argentina, closely examining the sky-high inflation rates that have marked the past years, exceeding 150 in recent 12 months. Yet David presents the decision by Argentina's new leader, without naming him, to combat inflation and central bank manipulation as a response to these dire financial conditions. The leader has proposed measures such as advocating the use of the US dollar as their currency and promising to clamp down on excessive government spending. The discourse sheds light on similar movements around the world, indicating a global cry for change. Using Hungary as an example, Boring describes his personal experiences living there, positioned against the growing liberalism. Hungary is restoring architectural structures from Soviet Union to reflect their historical heritage, re-emphasizing Christianity and valorizing their cultural values. Boring underscores how the country refutes a future that is culturally neutral, suggesting that there is value in preserving one's cultural identity. Despite the different political paths countries adopt, the conversation asserts that acknowledging the best parts of our culture can lead to a better future. Conservatism, in contrast with pessimistic viewpoints, can be seen as the foundation for problem solving and paving the way forward. The illustration of Argentina further clarifies this approach, displaying the effectiveness of economic incentives for societal enhancement. In addition, the dialogue indicates the integral role incentivization plays in different aspects of life, be it a company, a philosophy, or a social movement highlighting its necessity in fulfilling market needs. The discourse concludes noting the enthusiasm around the leadership in Argentina, as the leader seems to encapsulatively represent the breadth of demand for change. The creators encourage their audience to support their upcoming film, Lady Baller, set to premiere on their platform, Daily Wire, highlighting the role of such movies in engaging and stimulating popular discourse.